Another nice feature related to properties and methods, which exists also in JavaScript when you're using ES6 or later, but also in TypeScript, are static properties and methods. Static properties and methods allow you to add properties and methods to classes which are not accessed on an instance of the class, so where you don't need to call new class name first, but which you access directly on the class. This is often used for utility functions that you want to group or map to a class logically, or global constants which you also want to store in a class. An example built into JavaScript, which is not defined by TypeScript and not defined by you, but part of JavaScript in the browser, is the math constructor function, or a class if you want to call it like this. That's globally available in JavaScript, where you can access pi as a constant value to give you that pi number, or functions, or methods to be precise, like POW to calculate the power of something. These are methods and properties which you don't access on the instance of math. You don't have to call new math first. Indeed, that won't work. But you access these properties and methods directly on the class itself, so math acts more like a namespace as a grouping mechanism here. And that's a common use case for static methods and properties, and you can add them to your own classes as well. Let's say on department, we want to have the method that helps us create employees. And that is something we might want to be able to access without instantiating department, because we typically instantiate our more specialized versions, IT department and accounting department, and we don't really want to instantiate department just to call a utility method. And therefore we can add a method here, create employee, let's say, where we want to get the name, which is a string, as an argument, and there we want to return something. Now, to make that a static method, which we can access without instantiating this class, we add the static keyword in front of this method. And then in here, we maybe return an object where we have the name property mapped to this name value. Now, of course, that's a very simple method, but you get the idea. Now, to use that, we could go down there where we execute our code. And now let's say we want a new employee 1, well, then we can just get this with department.create employee and pass in Max, for example. And if I then console log employee 1, we should see an object with a name of Max. So if I save that, indeed here, this is the employee we just created. So this would be a typical example for a static method. We call it directly on the class without the new keyword, and therefore we use the class as a grouping mechanism, you could say. And if you would want to add a static property, you could do that as well. If you had something like the fiscal year here that you currently want to use in your company, you could set this to, let's say, 2020, and then again, to make it available without instantiating this, you could add static in front of this property or in front of that field, and now access that. So now down there, where I console log my created employee, here we can also access department.fiscal year, just like that, without instantiating it. And if we save that, unsurprisingly, we'll see 2020 being logged here. So these are static methods and properties. One important word about them, or one thing you should keep in mind, when you add them on a class, you can't access them from inside your non-static parts. So if you feel like accessing the fiscal year here in the constructor, and you want to console log it here, this, as you can see, will not work. I'm getting an error here that the property fiscal year is a static member. We can't access this here because the constructor and basically anything in there, all the methods as well, which are not marked with static, and you can't mark the constructor as static, by the way, will not be able to access static properties because this does refer to the instance created based on the class. Well, the static property is not available on an instance because the whole idea behind static properties and static methods is that they're detached from instances. So of course you can't access them with the this keyword. If you would want to use the static property or method from inside the class, you would have to use the class name here to access it. This gives you access to static properties and methods also from inside the class. That's one important thing to keep in mind.